The cause of the Air India Flight AI-71 tragedy has finally been uncovered, and it's far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. In the hours after the crash, theories spread like wildfire: engine failure, bird strike, even sabotage. But now, the preliminary investigation has revealed something so unexpected, it's shaking the very foundation of modern aviation. So, what really brought down Air India Flight AI-71? And could the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, once hailed as the safest aircraft in the sky, actually hide a fatal flaw? Let's find out. On the morning of June 12, 2025, Flight AI-71, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, lifted off from Mumbai, bound for London. On board, 230 passengers, 10 crew members, and 2 pilots. Moments later, it fell from the sky. The impact unleashed a fireball that lit up the horizon. Metal twisted, concrete shattered, and hundreds of lives were instantly reduced to memories. 260 people died, including 19 on the ground. India's deadliest aviation disaster in nearly 2 decades. But what truly stunned investigators wasn't the scale of the destruction, it was the reason behind it. According to the black box, the aircraft lifted off smoothly. Takeoff power set. Climb established. Everything normal. But just seconds later, both GEN X-1B engines lost thrust simultaneously. The Dreamliner's heart simply stopped beating. How could both engines fail at the exact same time? The preliminary report from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AIB, revealed something almost impossible to believe. Both engine fuel control switches that are never touched in flight, had been manually flipped from run to cutoff. That action cuts off fuel supply completely. And within 20 seconds, the 787 plummeted, slamming into the dormitory of BJ Medical College, carving a 300 by 120-meter path of destruction through the campus. In the aftermath, speculation ran wild. Mechanical fault, software glitch, bird strike, terrorism. But investigators ruled them all out. The 787, built in 2013, was in good condition. Minor maintenance items were noted, but none related to engine control. And here's the terrifying part. Those switches can't be flipped accidentally. They're protected by 2-step safety guards designed to prevent exactly this dot. So for both to move to cut off midair wasn't just unusual, it was unthinkable. Now all eyes turned to the cockpit, the only place where those switches could be touched. At the controls was a 32-year-old first officer, pilot flying for takeoff with 3,400 hours of experience. Beside him, a 56-year-old captain, a veteran with over 15,000 hours in the air. According to the cockpit voice recorder, a chilling exchange followed. "Why did you cut off?" "I didn't." Seconds later, both pilots tried to restart the engines, but it was already too late. The engines needed time to spool up. They never got the chance. So what really happened in that cockpit? During takeoff, pilots operate under immense pressure, monitoring climb rate, crosswinds, thrust levels, flight path, all within seconds. A single misstep can cascade into disaster. But this wasn't one misstep. Both switches protected. Deliberate actions were moved to cutoff, accidentally triggering both. Practically impossible. Could this have been a procedural mix-up, a moment of confusion under stress, or something darker, fatigue, cognitive overload, or a breakdown in communication? The AIB is now digging deep into the crew's backgrounds, flight simulator data, behavioral records, sleep cycles, and psychological profiles. Because somewhere in that data lies the moment where control slipped away. But investigators aren't stopping with the pilots. They're also scrutinizing Boeing's cockpit design itself. If 2-step safety locks exist, how could they fail? Was the switch placement or labeling confusing under stress? It's not the first time these questions have been raised. Aviation experts have long warned that cockpit ergonomics, even in the most advanced jets, don't always align with instinctive human behavior in crisis. And that's the uncomfortable truth. As aircraft become more automated, pilots are trained less to fly and more to manage systems. But when disaster strikes, when milliseconds matter, no computer can think faster than a human hand reaching for the wrong switch. In the wake of AI-71, aviation regulators are moving fast. India's DGCA launched a full-scale audit of all Boeing fuel systems. The FAA and EASA are quietly reviewing global standards for switch, labeling, and interface design. Because what this tragedy revealed is chilling. Even a perfectly functional aircraft can be destroyed by a single wrong command. The Boeing 787 didn't malfunction. It simply did what it was told, and that obedience, that blind precision, became fatal. The aftermath was devastating. The Dreamliner tore through student dorms, filled with young people studying for final exams. Entire buildings collapsed. Dozens were injured. The right engine tore loose and crashed through a rooftop water tank, and beyond the wreckage was silence. An unbearable silence. Air traffic controllers, who guided the flight's final moments, have taken leave. Unable to return to work, families torn apart still wait for answers that may never come. One mother lost both her husband and son that morning. Her 11-year-old looked up and asked, "Why did Daddy die?" There's no checklist in the world that can answer that, but from the ashes of AI-71 comes a lesson the world cannot ignore. Safety isn't just about machines or automation. It's about people, their focus, their communication, their ability to stay calm when chaos hits. And it's about humility, the reminder that even with all our technology, one human error can still bring a miracle of engineering crashing down. Flight AI-71 never made it home, but its legacy might just save countless others if the world chooses to listen. The cause of the Air India Flight AI-71 disaster has finally been revealed, and what investigators discovered inside that cockpit is far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. At first, everyone assumed it was another tragic accident, maybe an engine failure, a bird strike, or even sabotage. But as investigators dug deeper, the evidence pointed in one single, shocking direction, one that no one wanted to believe. So what really happened to Flight AI-71? Could one of the world's most advanced airliners, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, have fallen victim not to a malfunction, but to something far more human? Let's go back to where it all began. The TAKUFF was June 12, 2025. A humid morning in Mumbai. At 8:35 a.m., Air India Flight AI-71 began its journey to London Heathrow. On board were 230 passengers, 10 crew members, and 2 pilots. The aircraft, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, the pride of Air India's long-haul fleet, known for its efficiency, its range, and its cutting-edge automation. The Dreamliner was supposed to represent the future of safe air travel. The crew performed their pre-flight checks. The engines roared to life, those powerful GE NX-1B turbofans spinning at full thrust. The jet accelerated down the runway, lifted off gracefully, and began its climb into the clouds. Everything seemed perfect. But barely 90 seconds later, everything went wrong. The FAL lot 8 hours, 39 minutes, and 50 seconds. AI-71 was climbing steadily at 180 knots. Then, without warning, both engines lost power. Not one, both. The aircraft, suddenly silent, began to drop. In that moment, every alarm in the cockpit lit up. The stick shaker buzzed violently. The pilots pulled, shouted, and scrambled, but the Dreamliner was no longer climbing. It was falling. Seconds later, a blinding flash illuminated the morning sky as the aircraft slammed into the BJ Medical College campus. The explosion could be heard for miles. When the smoke cleared, all that remained was a crater, 260 people dead, including 19 on the ground. It was India's deadliest air disaster in nearly 2 decades. But the real horror wasn't what happened. It was why it happened. The impossible fiel noir when investigators recovered the black boxes. The data was baffling. No mechanical failure, no bird strike, no evidence of sabotage. Both engines had simply stopped. But what the data revealed next made seasoned investigators go pale. The fuel control switches, the controls that determine whether the engines receive fuel, had been manually moved from run to cutoff. While the plane was still in the air, to anyone in aviation, that's a death sentence. It instantly kills both engines, cutting off all thrust. And here's the terrifying part. Those switches are protected. They require 2 deliberate actions to move. They can't be bumped or nudged by mistake. So how did they both end up off? CO6APIT answer that. Investigators turned to the cockpit voice recorder. The final moments, captured a chilling exchange. "Why did you cut off?" "I didn't." In those few words, confusion, panic, disbelief. Both pilots tried to restart the engines immediately, but it was already too late. Jet engines need time to spool up, to reignite, to rebuild thrust, and time was the one thing they didn't have. 15 seconds later, Flight AI-71 hit the ground. The first officer, 32 years old, was the pilot flying. He had over 3,400 hours of flight time, including 1,100 hours on the Boeing 787. Him, the captain, a 56-year-old veteran with 15,000 flight hours, was monitoring two competent pilots. A routine departure, a perfectly functional aircraft. So how could this happen? Under PRE says you are right, after takeoff, the cockpit is one of the most high-stress environments in aviation. The pilots are busy adjusting flaps, managing climb power, checking for warnings, monitoring crosswinds, altitude, and airspeed, all while maintaining communication with air traffic control. It's a blur of motion, sound, and mental load. And sometimes, under that pressure, instinct can betray even the best trained minds. Music, the cause of the tragic AI-71 crash involving an Air India Boeing 787, has finally been revealed. And it's far more shocking than anyone thought. In the hours following the disaster, countless theories emerged, ranging from engine failure to sabotage. But the preliminary investigation has pointed to a shocking conclusion that is now sending shockwaves through the entire aviation industry. So, what exactly led to the AI-71 catastrophe? And is the Boeing 787 truly the flying coffin people fear it might be? Join us and find out. On the morning of June 12, 2025, Air India Flight AI-71, a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner carrying 230 passengers, 10 crew members, and 2 pilots, plunged from the sky just moments after takeoff. What followed was a fireball of unimaginable magnitude, leaving behind shattered metal, scorched earth, and hundreds of lives reduced to memories. The crash claimed the lives of 260 people, nearly everyone on board, and 19 more on the ground. It marked India's deadliest aviation disaster in nearly 2 decades. But what truly stunned the world wasn't just the scale of the catastrophe, it was the reason behind it. According to black box data and flight monitoring systems, AI-171 lifted off at exactly 8,839. By 8,850, it had reached a steady climb at 180 knots. But then, in less than a heartbeat, the unthinkable happened. Both GE and X-1B engines lost thrust simultaneously. The Dreamliner's propulsion system had been severed in a single catastrophic instant. What could have caused such a deadly failure? A preliminary report from India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AIB, revealed a jaw-dropping discovery. Both engine fuel control switches, intended only for use on the ground, had been manually moved from run to cutoff while the aircraft was mid-air. This is an absolute taboo in aviation because it will stop the fuel flow to both engines in flight. As a result, within 20 seconds, the aircraft plummeted and slammed into the dormitory of BJ Medical College, leaving behind a 300 by 120 meter swath of devastation. In the hours after the crash, speculation ran wild. Engine failure, bird strike, software bug, terrorism. But each theory was swiftly dismissed by the investigators. This wasn't a case of mechanical failure. The 787-8, built in 2013 and routinely maintained, had no known critical issues, while a few meal items, minimum equipment list, were active, including minor problems with the nitrogen system and secondary sensors. None were linked to engine control. A 2018 FAA advisory had warned of potential disconnect risks in similar fuel control locks on Boeing aircraft, but compliance was still based on the captain. What raised even more alarm, there is no accidental activation in this case. The Boeing 787's fuel control switches are protected by a 2-step safeguard designed to prevent this. For both switches to be flipped to cut off mid-flight was not only highly irregular, a move so unlikely, so deeply safeguarded that investigators initially refused to believe it had even occurred. So, what is the mystery behind this? But wait, if you're still here, thank you for staying with us. If you found this meaningful, we'd truly appreciate it if you could like, share, and subscribe. It helps us keep telling stories that matter. Thank you, truly. To uncover the truth behind this mystery, we must return to the cockpit to that exact morning and trace what really happened in those final, irreversible moments. Now, all attention shifts to the only two people who could have touched those switches, the captain and the first officer. According to official procedures, the first officer, just 32 years old, was the pilot flying during takeoff. He held a commercial pilot license with 3,400 total flight hours, including 1,100 on the Boeing 787. Sitting beside him was the captain, aged 56, a veteran aviator with an airline transport pilot license, and more than 15,000 hours in the air, over half of them on the Dreamliner. He was supervising. The cockpit voice recorder captured a chilling fragment of dialogue. "Why did you cut off?" "I didn't." In that instant, both men understood something had gone terribly wrong. They immediately flipped the fuel switches back to run. But it was already too late. The engines, even functioning perfectly, require precious seconds to spool back up. As a result, 15 seconds later, Flight AI-71 slammed into the ground. But how? How could such an event unfold? In the cockpit right after takeoff, the workload is intense. Pilots monitor thrust, altitude, system warnings, crosswinds, and more, all within a narrow window of time. Under such pressure, even a fleeting lapse can become fatal. Yet, this wasn't a single error. Both fuel switches, protected by deliberate two-step activation, were flipped to cut off in midair. The odds of both being triggered accidentally are astronomically low. So, if this wasn't an accident, what was it? Could it have been a procedural misunderstanding? A breakdown in cockpit communication? A fatal misinterpretation of the switch layout? The AIB is now peeling back every layer of this enigma, reviewing the crew's simulator records, assessing behavioral patterns, scrutinizing their rest cycles, and diving into psychological profiles. Was this cognitive overload, fatigue, a split-second misjudgment, or something darker? A flaw so subtle it's gone unnoticed until now. But the human angle is only part of the suspicion. Aviation engineers are now reevaluating Boeing's cockpit design itself. While anti-occult mechanisms protect the fuel switches, investigators are asking whether their ergonomics, or perhaps even their labeling, might lead to confusion in high-stress scenarios. This isn't the first time such questions have surfaced. Previous incidents have raised concerns that cockpit interfaces, while advanced, may not always align with instinctive human behavior under stress. Then comes the matter of standard operating procedures. Were fuel switch protocols adequately reinforced during recurrent training? Pilot unions and safety analysts have long warned that real cockpit dynamics during takeoff don't always match textbook scenarios. Under immense pressure, memory and instinct don't always align, even among seasoned flight crews. Moreover, the deeper issue is modern training itself. As aircraft become more automated, pilots are increasingly trained to manage systems, not fly manually. But when chaos strikes, when milliseconds matter, there is no algorithm that can think for them. In light of the AI-71 disaster, several training centers are already revising their simulator. Scenarios to include high-press switch failures where instinct and decision-making must collide in real time. Regulators immediately moved. India's DGCA has launched a full-scale audit of switch labeling and fuel management. Procedures across every Boeing aircraft in Indian service. International bodies, including EA and the FAA, are quietly re-examining standards around critical switch, placement, and interface. Designed because AI-71 has revealed something uncomfortable, that even a perfectly functioning machine can fall from the sky if given the wrong command, and that's exactly what happened here. The Boeing 787, a modern high-tech aircraft built to handle emergencies, didn't malfunction. Everything worked as it should. Warning systems activated. Backup systems stayed online. But when the fuel switches were turned off, the plane simply followed the command. It didn't know it was a mistake. It just did what it was told. The real mistake wasn't what we believed it to be. The fault didn't lie in hardware nor in software. The failure came from within the cockpit. That one action, perhaps a misstep, perhaps a misunderstanding, silenced to engines and sealed the fate of 260 lives. And in doing so, it exposed a haunting truth about the illusion of automation safety. In an era when machines are trusted to do more than ever, it is still the human at the controls who can override it all for better or worse. What followed was devastation beyond words. The Dreamliner struck a student dormitory where hundreds of young people were in the middle of their final exams. 6 buildings were torn apart. Dozens were left injured, some critically. The right engine tore free as it hit a rooftop water tank. The tail was found embedded deep inside another wing of the building. Beyond the technical and procedural fallout, the emotional toll of AI-71 is profound. Survivors, families, and even investigators have spoken of the lasting trauma, nightmares, guilt, and silence. Some air traffic controllers who handled the flight's final moments have since taken leave, unable to return to work. In aviation, a field built on precision and calm, such emotional tolls are rarely discussed, but they are real. More than 260 families were shattered that morning, but numbers can't capture what was truly lost. One mother lost both her husband and her son. An 11-year-old boy looked up at his grieving mother and asked, "Why did Daddy die?" A question no one could ever answer. No investigation, no technical finding can ever make sense of that kind of pain. But the truth, as unbearable as it may be, must be brought to light. Not to point fingers, not to reopen wounds,